Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and today I am so excited to be filming my reading wrap up of all of the books that I read in the first 2 months of the year. So I decided to do bi-monthly reading wrap ups because I'm quite a slow reader and I just felt like I never had enough books to talk about at the end of every single month. That being said, I have quite a big stack of books to talk you through today. So yes, without further ado, I'm just going to jump straight in and start showing you the books that I read. So the first book that I picked up in 2022 was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, and what a fantastic way to start my reading year. I'll be very surprised if this doesn't make it onto my top 10 books of 2022 at the end of the year, because this is now a new favourite of mine. So in this story we follow our main character Laszlo, who is an orphan of war and he is brought up in a monastery, and he never really fits in with the lifestyle at the monastery because he's a bit of a dreamer, hence the title of the book. And so when one day he ends up going on an errand to a library, he decides to never leave. So the librarians find Laszlo curled up amongst the stacks and they decide to take him under their wing and train him up to be a librarian himself. And so Laszlo spends quite a lot of his young adult life working in the library, and that really suits him because it means that he can read all of the books and he can also study his passion, which is this lost city known as Weep. So in this world there is this city that ended up being cut off from the rest of the world, and no one can actually remember what happened to this city. No one can even remember the city's real name. It just is referred to as Weep. It's almost as if the name of the city has actually been erased from everybody's memories. And Laszlo has always been incredibly fascinated with this city for various reasons, and so in this book we basically follow him as he uncovers more about what happened to this city, and it is just so well done. That is all I'm going to say about this book. There is a lot more to it, but I feel like it's better to go in with a vague premise because I actually went into this one without knowing a huge amount, and I think that really added to my enjoyment. So I would recommend not reading the full synopsis before you go into this book. But yes, it is so beautiful. The things that I really adored about this book were absolutely the writing, because the prose is so lyrical and beautiful, and Laini Taylor really creates such imaginative and vivid scenes within this book that have really stuck with me. I also very much enjoyed the characters. Of course, we've got our main character Laszlo, who I really loved, and we also have a second perspective in this book which I also really enjoyed, but I don't want to say who that is because I feel like that might be a little bit of a spoiler. I also loved the romance in here, so it's actually probably one of my favourite romances that I've read in a fantasy book for a while. Now, I'm not talking steamy romance at all in here. That's not what you're gonna get. Don't go into it expecting that, but what you will get is a really pure, innocent kind of romance between two characters who have never really had the opportunity to form intimate relationships before, and it is just so beautifully done. So yes, I absolutely adored this one. It's a new favourite of mine and I cannot wait to get to the sequel. It's classified as YA, but I would say that there are some more mature themes in there, so I would recommend it for people who are in the higher age range in the YA category, or for adults like me. But yes, absolutely adored this one. Thought it was fantastic. Okay, so the second book that I picked up was Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. Now, I filmed a in-depth spoiler-free review video for this book, so I'm going to try and keep this one quite brief, but if you want to know my full thoughts and feelings, I will link that video down below. But if you've not heard of this story, this is a book that follows our main character Wallace Price, who is a really successful lawyer, but he's also a pretty terrible person. He's incredibly selfish and really quite unlikable in the beginning of the book. And the story kicks off when he actually dies unexpectedly of a heart attack and is very surprised to find himself standing at his own funeral, and that is where he meets his reaper, who takes him to this quirky tea shop which acts as a kind of way station for people who have died but who aren't quite ready to pass on yet. And that is where he meets a man called Hugo, who has dedicated a lot of his life to helping people like Wallace who have died, to prepare them essentially to go on to whatever comes next. And so in this book we follow Wallace on his journey to accepting his own death and to kind of realizing some of the mistakes that he perhaps made in life and to uncovering what is actually truly meaningful to him. And yeah, so it covers quite a lot of heavy topics in here of grief, of death, of mental health. And while that sounds kind of doom and gloom, TJ Klune actually has a fantastic way of offsetting that with his humor, and that is definitely what I enjoyed most about this book. I thought it was really funny. It definitely had me laughing out loud at times. I also really loved the characters in here. This definitely has that found family, warm, fuzzy feeling that I've come to expect from his books, so I really loved that. However, I did have a few sort of small issues with this book in terms of the pacing and also with the ending of the book, because I just feel like this book could have been a lot more poignant and have a lot more weight if it ended in a slightly different way. But yeah, I would recommend this book if you're looking for something that's a standalone fantasy and for something that has a very light exploration into grief and mental health, but is also quite uplifting. I think that you would really enjoy this book. The next book is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. So this is the first book in a new adult fantasy series that's based on Norse mythology. So this book is set on Vigrid, which is the battle plane where the gods fell, which is very cool. And in this book we follow three main perspectives. The first perspective is a woman called Orca, who is quite a fierce character. She's very morally grey and she will literally stop at nothing to keep her family safe. We've then got the perspective of Varg, who is an escaped slave who is very much motivated by his quest to avenge his sister. And then the final perspective is of Elvar, who is a very fierce warrior, and she is very much trying to prove her worth and to win her battle fame within the highly acclaimed Battle Grimm. So we have some really interesting characters in this book. I think what I enjoyed most about this story was the setting, because that was so well done. The world building was fantastic, and I love the fact that we also had mythological creatures and things in here, and I really enjoyed their part to play within this world. My only criticisms really would just be based on my personal taste. I feel like there was a little bit too much action in here for me and not enough character development for me to really feel invested in each character and their stories. I also felt like because the chapters are quite short and we switch between different perspectives with each chapter, that just meant that for me personally, I didn't feel like I had enough time to sit with each character to really kind of get invested in their storylines and to get a true sense of who they were, which meant that in the beginning of the book I was kind of mixing up the characters a little bit, and it took me a while to get my head around each of the different characters. There are also quite a lot of side characters in here that all have very similar names that I also got mixed up in my head a little bit, because I just feel like they weren't quite explored in enough depth. That being said, it was a really gripping story. There were a lot of fantastic fight scenes. I think you'll really enjoy this if you love action in your stories, if you like blood and guts and hand-to-hand combat. This is fantastic for that. And I also feel like I'm going to enjoy this series more and more as we get the later books, because I think we're going to get more magic in the next books to come, which is very interesting. And yes, now I've got a clearer picture of who the characters are and what their motives are, I do think that I'm going to enjoy the sequels a little bit more. And this book did end on quite a few reveals, which are very exciting. So yeah, I will definitely be continuing on with this series and feel like this was a good start. The next book that I finished was another adult fantasy book, and that is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the second book in his Mistborn trilogy. The first book, The Final Empire, actually made it onto my top 10 books of 2021 list. So yes, I do really enjoy this series, and obviously I can't talk too much about the plot of the second one because it's a sequel, but the first book basically follows a rebellion plotline. So it's set in this world where there is this evil lord ruler who's been ruling over the Final Empire for as long as anyone can remember, and in the first story we follow a man called Kelsier who's trying to put together a group of skilled allomancers to overthrow the lord ruler. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think what people know the series for is the magic system, because it's very unique. So in this world there are some rare people who have this ability to ingest and harness the powers of metals, and the way that Brandon Sanderson uses uses that magic system within the fight scenes, and the way that it's described is just so cool. And yeah, I really enjoyed the first book. I also enjoyed the second book, although I did find it a little bit slower to get into. I think because it's a little bit more heavy on the politics in this book, and it's also not quite as clear where the plot is going, and I think for that reason it took me a while to become invested in the story, if that makes sense. But that being said, the last third of this book was so much fun. We had some really great action scenes and some epic moments, and the book ended on quite a big reveal, which has me very excited for the final book. This book also has a lot of kind of mysteries woven throughout it, and little tidbits of information that haven't all been sort of tied together yet, so I'm very excited to get to the final book to see all of those things hopefully come together in a really satisfying way. So yes, if you haven't yet got to this series, I would recommend it. I think it's a lot of fun. It's quite accessible in its writing style as well, so if you're thinking of shifting from YA to adult, I think this might be quite a good series to go for. Yeah, really enjoyed this one. Oh, I forgot to say that I actually read this one on audio as well rather than physically, and I would definitely recommend the audiobook for this one because it has a full cast of characters and it's got sound effects and things, and it just is such an enjoyable experience. So if you're looking for an audiobook, would recommend. Okay, so after reading all of those fantasy books, I decided to shake things up a little bit in February and try a contemporary romance, which is something that I don't normally gravitate towards. But the book that I decided to go for was Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this is the second book in her Brown Sisters trilogy, which is an adult contemporary romance series where each book follows a different sister from the same family. So in this book we follow the middle sister, who is a woman called Dani, and she is quite a headstrong character. She knows what she wants in life and she knows exactly how she's going to get it. She's working in a university as a lecturer, and she's also working towards her PhD, and she feels like she's pretty much got everything going in her life. The only thing that's missing is a casual hookup partner. So Dani is not looking for romance at all. She just wants someone she can have a good time with, no strings attached. And yeah, the story kind of kicks off when she ends up getting rescued during a fire drill by the security guard called Zaf. And a video of this heroic rescue actually ends up going viral online because Zaf is actually a former famous rugby player, so people recognize him and the video goes viral, and that's actually quite beneficial for Zaf because he owns a charity and the viral video has caused his charity to get a lot more attention, and so he decides to proposition Dani and to ask her if she wants to go into a fake dating type situation so that he can kind of profit off the publicity, and the story kind of goes on from there. I think you can see where this is going, but I had a lot of fun with this one. I really enjoyed the perspectives of both Dani and Zaf in here and how different they are, because Dani is obviously just wanting to have a casual relationship, whereas Zaf is much more of a hopeless romantic, and he reads romance books in his spare time, and it was just really lovely seeing their dynamic, watching them play off each other. And yeah, there was just something about the humour in this one that just really worked for me. I loved it. I also really enjoyed how real the characters felt, which is something that I've come to really enjoy about Talia Hibbert's writing, because while the characters seemed a little bit cookie cutter in the beginning, as you read through the story you kind of realize more of their hidden depths and you see why they are the way they are. And I just really enjoyed those moments where they opened up to each other, because you know, there are some characters in here who are dealing with things like grief and mental health and anxiety, and yeah, I find those moments where characters disclose parts of themselves to each other that they perhaps don't really talk about with anyone else much more intimate than the steamy sex scenes, which were really good by the way. But yeah, it just made me really root for the characters. So yes, I would highly recommend this one if you're looking for a fun contemporary romance that's got lots of those great steamy sex scenes but is also really funny and has great characters. Really enjoyed this one. I think I actually enjoyed this one more than Get a Life Chloe Brown, which is something that I didn't think that I would be saying, but yes, my favourite in the series so far. Okay, next we have a fantasy romance that has received quite a lot of hype online, and that is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. So this is the first book in a new adult fantasy romance series, and this is a Hades and Persephone retelling. It's an urban fantasy, it's a modern retelling, and essentially in this story we follow our main character Persephone, who is a goddess, but there is something wrong with her powers. So flowers kind of shrivel and die at her touch rather than bloom and blossom, and so for that reason she is kept hidden. She's hiding out in the mortal world, trying to live a normal life. She's training to be a journalist, and then one day she ends up going to this club which is actually owned by Hades, the god of the underworld, and she of course makes this impossible deal with Hades, who basically tells her that she needs to create life in the underworld or she will lose her freedom forever. Now, I had fun with this book. I would say this feels like the kind of story that you go into for the erotica rather than for the fantasy plotline, because for me the fantasy elements were a little bit lacking, and the second half of the book was 90% sex scenes, which, you know, were fun, but yeah, I just wanted a little bit more from this. So yeah, I don't think I would be continuing on with this series, I'm afraid. Yeah, my main issue really was the main character Persephone, because she reads quite young and immature. She makes a lot of very silly decisions, and she also insists on seeing the worst in Hades, despite him telling her multiple times that he perhaps isn't as bad as what she thinks he is, and that just really bugged me. That being said, I do know a lot of people really enjoy this one, so if you're looking for a very steamy Hades and Persephone retelling, and if you quite like the whole insta-love, insta-lust type thing in a book, then I think that you would really get on with this one, but yeah, not for me. The next book that I have to show you is another fantasy romance book, and that is Radiance, written by Grace Draven. So this again is the first book in a series. It's self-published and I love this one. So in this book we follow an arranged marriage between two people. So we have a human woman and we also have a Kai prince. So they are both from different fantasy races and they get married to form an alliance for political reasons, and it's very clear right from the beginning that they both are very physically unattracted to each other. They find each other quite gross to look at, and they're very open and honest with this about each other, and they kind of have a laugh about it with each other, which is so fun to read. So they start off with this really playful dynamic. It's very clear that they connect with their personalities and they make each other laugh, which is so sweet, and then ever so slowly throughout the book it progresses into something deeper, and it is just so beautiful to read about. I really enjoyed this. I also enjoyed the fantasy plotline, because in this world some people aren't happy about the union between these two races, so that causes some political tension, and I also enjoyed finding out a little bit more about the Kai people, because they were quite interesting and they have quite a unique power. I also just really enjoyed all of the chapters that were from the Kai Prince's perspective, because it's really funny and quite fun to see things through his eyes, because obviously he thinks that humans are strange. He doesn't like the way that we look, and he thinks that things that we eat are really gross, and it's just really interesting getting inside his head. For example, the Kai people don't actually have any irises or any pupils. They've just got like blank eyeballs, and so they think it's really disgusting that our eyes move around and everything, and yeah, all in all, had a really fun time with this one. Okay, next we have Stormfront by Jim Butcher. So this is the first book in the Dresden Files series, which is a very long and very loved fantasy series. I think there's something like 17 books that have currently been published, so I've got a long way to go with this one. But the reason why I decided to start this series is because it's actually my partner's favourite book series, or one of them anyway, and he's been pestering me to get to this series for the longest time, so I decided to finally start with the first book. And yeah, if you haven't heard of this series before, this is a fantasy noir type series, and in this book we follow our main character Harry Dresden, who is a private investigator, and he also just so happens to be Chicago's only professional wizard, and so he works alongside the Chicago PD's special investigations team whenever there is a murder case that seems to have some kind of supernatural origin. And it seems to me that each book kind of follows a different case. However, However, according to my partner, the books move away from the kind of mystery genre and place more emphasis on the fantasy elements and the wider supernatural world as you progress through the series, which I'm quite excited for. But yeah, I quite enjoyed this book. I don't feel like it was anything particularly groundbreaking. What I do want to say right off the bat though is that I'm very glad that my partner warned me that the author over objectifies all the female characters in his books, because yeah, honestly, if I wasn't prepared for that, I probably would have DNF'd this book, because the kind of persistent objectification of women in here is just so unnecessary. But that aside, I did enjoy the story. It was fast paced. I really liked the fact that we had the mystery that was set against the paranormal backdrop, and yeah, I quite enjoyed our main character. I liked the fact that he was quite flawed. He's very much down on his luck. He uses humor definitely as a defense mechanism, when actually 90% of the time he's actually terrified and flying by the seat of his pants. So I quite like that. I also enjoyed the hints towards the wider fantasy world, and the fact that Jim Butcher didn't feel like he had to give us everything in this first book, but there was enough in there to intrigue me. So there were different fantasy creatures in this book that were quite interesting to read about, and our main character Harry Dresden has this very cool ability to open his third eye, which was really well described, and I thought that was really interesting in this book as well. So yeah, I enjoyed this one for the most part. It was, you know, fun once we moved past the whole objectifying women thing. Yeah, I will be continuing on with this series because I want to see what all the hype is about, and I just hear that it gets better and better. So yeah, that's that one. The final book that I have to talk to you about today is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. In this book we follow our main character Tristan, who is a young man, and he basically goes to try and retrieve this fallen star in order to win the hand of the woman that he loves. And so he goes off on this adventure to retrieve this fallen star, and the adventure takes him through into this fantasy realm, and it turns out that there are quite a few people who are after the same thing as Tristan for various reasons. We've got a witch who's after the fallen star for eternal youth, and we also have some princes who are looking for the star as well, because they need to retrieve the star in order to become king. And I just want to preface this little section by saying that the movie Stardust, which was based off of this book, is actually one of my favorite movies of all time. So I had very high hopes going into this one, which was kind of a shame, because I actually felt a little bit disappointed by the book, which I hate saying, but yeah, I actually preferred the movie, which is surprising because it's normally the other way around for me. But yeah, I just feel like this book is very short. I think it's only just over 200 pages or something, and so there were actually things that happened in the movie that weren't in the book, and I missed those things. And so yeah, I just kind of wish this was a little bit longer, because in this story it felt very much like we were jumping from this to this to this very quickly, and for me that meant that I wasn't as invested in the characters, in particular in the romance. I didn't feel that emotional connection between the characters, which is a bit of a shame. That being said, I did enjoy the writing in here. Neil Gaiman has such a fantastic whimsical writing style, and I did really enjoy the fact that this was a fairy tale that had adult themes, because I don't feel like you see that a lot. So yeah, there were things that I enjoyed about this book, but I definitely preferred the movie. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope that you enjoyed this reading wrap up and hearing all of my rambly thoughts about all of the books that I read in the first 2 months of the year. If you've read any of these books before, please do let me know, because I'd love to have a little chat with you in the comments, or let me know what you've picked up and if there's anything you think that I would enjoy reading, because I'm always on the hunt for those book recommendations, and I just love chatting about books. So yeah, thank you so much, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!